guys, so I am going to do a quick review on the book of Ezra, the prophet and the scribe. I'm going to do just 1 or 2 points from each chapter just to remind us what we went over in each chapter in this short book of Ezra. Now, if you want to know what's in the entire book or entire chapter, you have to read the chapter for yourself. And I would suggest that you do that prayerfully, meditate on it, and let the Lord minister to you. Feed your spirit from the Word of God. This chapter begins with Israel in captivity in Babylon, because Nebuchadnezzar invaded Israel and tore down the beautiful temple that Solomon had built, destroyed it to the ground, and he took Israel and Judah into captivity. So now we're about to read from the scribe who was writing, because King Cyrus is about to do something now to those that were in bondage. First chapter says King Cyrus of Persia commanded and helped Judah to return to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. In his proclamation, Cyrus stresses that he had been given all the kingdoms of the earth by God. Temple items are also returned. Then the Jews are led by Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. In chapters 2, Israel returned from exile in Babylon to Jerusalem and Judah, led by Zerubbabel. The number listings of all who returned were noted in this chapter, and then there was the free will offerings that were made to help to rebuild the temple. In chapters 3, on the 7th month, which is the celebration of atonement, the trumpets and tabernacles, the altar is rebuilt on its own foundation where the temple once stood. And sacrifices and the festivals began again. And then the rebuilding of the temple began, and there was loud, joyous singing and praising the Lord, while some of the older men, because it was the first time they saw the foundation, they began to cry so hard that the praises and the joyful cries were mixed together, and people could not decide which was crying and which was praising. In chapters 4, the sneaky enemies of Judah offered to help to rebuild the temple, but Zerubbabel, he refused their assistance. The Samaritans, who were the enemies of Judah under the reign of King Ahasuerus, wrote a letter of accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem, pertaining to them rebuilding the temple and the wall. In the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, the Samaritans wrote another letter saying that if Jerusalem is rebuilt, Persian control of it will cease, and Artaxerxes forces the building project to cease, which it did until the 2nd year reign of King Darius. In chapters 5, Haggai and Zechariah exhorted the people to start rebuilding the temple. In chapter 6, King Darius searched the royal records and finds Cyrus' decree and orders the rebuilding of the temple to continue. The temple is completed and dedicated, and the Passover is kept. In chapter 7, Ezra, who is a skilled scribe, and he is a priest and the descendant of Zadok, he gains Artaxerxes' favor and returns from Babylon to Jerusalem, Artaxerxes then commanded Ezra to offer all the gold and silver he found in Babylon for the temple, and Ezra is also given power and authority to impose taxes and enforce the Mosaic law. And then Ezra gave thanks. In chapters 9, Ezra provided a list of all those who accompanied him to Jerusalem. And Ezra, he did not ask for a Persian escort because he was trusting the Lord to protect them from the enemies. And then gifts were also brought to the temple. In chapters 9, some Jews, some of the priests and the Levites, they marry, and even some of the Israelites, they marry to non-Jews. They marry all those nations. They marry their sons and their daughters to the sons and daughters of the nations that God told them not to marry. And then Ezra, he grieved about it, and he prayed to God in front of the people. Then he confesses his sins, and he humbled himself, and he interceded for them. In chapters 10, a meeting is held about all the people who was marrying the foreign men and having children, families with them. Then Shechaniah, one of the priests, he proposes a covenant that they would put away their wives that they have from the other nations, and their children that were aborted through those wives. And a period of mourning ensued, and the Jews, all of them, the Levites, the Israelites, the priests, all of them that were in offense, that married and had these strange wives, they confessed their sins, and they agreed to put away the wives and the children of the marriage. In each case of intermarriage, a 3-month period was given for investigation because there were so many cases. And in the end, a list of all those that were guilty of such sin in the case of intermarrying into those nations that were abominable to the Lord, a list of all the guilty men were recorded. Thus ends the review of the book of Ezra, and I thank you for this journey, reading these books, these chapters with me, because it has been pretty interesting. And now we will continue on as we move on to the book of Nehemiah. Thank you again for your patience, and also just hanging in with me as we read the Word of God together. Stay blessed, everybody. See you around. I'm headed to the book of Nehemiah next.